Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat. I am one of these perpetually uncertain people, and I'm your host. And I took a bit of a break last week because I felt like I needed one. And that is kind of the topic of today's episode. Sometimes we have to just accept that things aren't flowing and that they're just not working and to not force them. Because a big lesson I've learned throughout my life is that if you force something, you're going to break it. And I learned this lesson actually when I was in high school. I took a photography class and we used a 35 millimeter camera, like a film camera. And I remember our teacher telling us, everything that you do on the camera, like anything that you try to shift or click into place or anything like that should happen smoothly. There should be no resistance. And he said, if there's any resistance, then don't force it because you're going to break it. It's just not meant to go that way. And I've carried that with me throughout most of my life, honestly. And it's reminded me that sometimes things are not meant to go the way you want them to go. And this ties into a video I recorded this week. I took another break from recording videos as well because I just needed some time to kind of refresh and gain some, momentum. And now it feels a little odd talking into a microphone, which is really weird. But the topic of this video was what you need to happen will happen as it needs to. It's not going to happen the way you want it to. It's not going to be exactly what you pre-planned in your head because that's not how life works. But there are things that need to happen, that you need to happen for you in your life, in the way you're trying to create your life, that will happen as they need to. It'll happen in a way that you might not have expected. And so when we try to force things to happen the way we want them to, we end up breaking things. We end up prolonging our journeys. We end up, chipping away at our self-worth and our self-trust because we try to force this thing into place. It doesn't work. And that just validates this feeling of, I don't get anything I want. Nothing works out for me. It's like, maybe it's because you're just trying to force things to work out in a very specific way, when in reality, sometimes the things that we really want and that are like the best for us ultimately aren't going to be exactly how we want them to be. They're going to be completely different, but they're still going to have the same effect. They're going to feel the way we do want that thing to feel. But because we're kind of limiting our view of it to this very narrow path, a path that we think we have to take or someone else has told us to, or we've seen someone do it and we're like, you know what, I want exactly that thing. You're not exactly that person. You're going to have a different way of experiencing life. And this is something that I've had to learn, of course, the hard way. You have to let things flow as they need to. You have to be open and able to accept that you do not have control all the time. There are some things you do have control of course, and there are some things you cannot control at all. There's some things that you will have to just accept, despite how awful and, shitty and just painful these might be, because of course life is full of suffering. Like, to live is to also experience suffering, right? But if you can't change those things, there's no point beating yourself up over the fact that you can't change it. And in those moments, you have to accept it. You have to accept that this is just not flowing. It's just not aligned. It's just not working. And this is something I've had to learn kind of the last couple of weeks, where I've noticed myself even transitioning into a different phase of my life, both as a person and as a creative online. And I'm sure many of you who follow me already have realized this. And I don't know if I've talked about this before, but I might as well talk about it again because it is part of this topic. But I've rebranded in a sense. Actually, I've unbranded myself. I think for a long time, I felt uncomfortable showing up as myself online. Even though, of course, everything I talk about, everything I post or whatever, it is authentic to me, but it has been under this kind of character in a sense. Like, my name used to be Katarina Writes on my socials. Then I changed to Katarina Guides because I felt like that was more aligned with the work I do, and it was. But I've realized like a lot of that has been a bit of a mask in a sense, right? A character, a brand. And I've realized now at this point that I've gone in my life, fitting myself or forcing myself to be in this kind of box and having it work out in this specific way because it felt safer and more comfortable, wasn't flowing anymore. It didn't feel aligned. It felt like I was stifling myself. And so again, if you follow me on TikTok or on Instagram, you've probably noticed that I have changed my handles to just my name. And I know that sounds so trivial. It sounds so silly for me to even like announce this, but I think it is important for anybody else who struggles with this as well. showing up as yourself and letting things happen as they need to happen, right? Not trying to create something specific and forcing that to work out the way you think it should work out because other people are doing it this way, or, you know, it's safer to have a bit of a certain persona about you. I've realized that I have to just kind of accept the fact that I am who I am, and it's okay to just show up as you are. It's okay to just be how you are and to let things flow and change. And I feel like by creating this very rigid persona, I was preventing myself from allowing flow to happen, right? Because if I have to create this persona, that means I have to stay within the parameters of this persona rather than, you know, being me, showing up as myself, branding myself, quote unquote, as me, which allows me flexibility to be able to show up as I want to, however I want to, right? I can create videos, I can do podcasts, I can write, I can do one-to-one calls, like I can do all that stuff as me. It doesn't have to be something very, very specific that I have to force into place, even if it doesn't feel quite right. But this can apply to so many aspects of life. It can apply to any kind of work you do, any kind of creative endeavors you have, relationships, anything like that. If it doesn't flow and you have to force it, you're going to break it. It's not going to feel right. It's not going to work out in the way you need it to in order to feel aligned. And remember that if you're struggling with this, there is something that needs to happen for you, right? There's something out there that's aligned for you, that's on your path, that's on your journey, that will fit into place for you. But you have to let go of the expectation of what you think it should look like or what you want it to look like, because that might not at all be aligned with you. And I know this is something I talk about often. I repeat this over and over again, but it is so important. Things will happen as they need to, not as you want them to. And that is, in a sense, kind of having to strip away the power that your ego feels like it has. This idea of like, no, but I'm in control. I get to dictate things. I feel like the need for that much control and that much rigidity is out of fear. It's fear of not having control, of losing control. And, you know, what does it mean to lose control then? Like, who am I if I don't have this control? It kind of feels almost like a bit of like a death to lose that level of control and to just accept things. Just, okay, this is what it is. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is how I do, you know, like, this is what flows. And yeah, it doesn't look like what I thought it was going to look like. It doesn't look like what that other person's doing, but it is what it is. And that's great. And I can work with this. This is what it looks like. And I will now find flow and alignment within this. And that thing, whatever it is right now, will change. And that's actually the hardest thing for me to have accepted as well throughout my life. That whatever's happening presently will inevitably change, and you have to also flow with that too. There is no, like, oddly enough, and it sounds kind of scary to say this even to myself, that's why I'm hesitating a bit, there is no security. And coming from somebody who's like a control freak, who is very fearful of things being out of control and not having security and things always changing, I'm realizing and having to accept that there is no security. Nothing will be the same forever. Things will always change. And that's scary. But I think the more and more you try to allow yourself to accept that, the easier life becomes, in a sense, you know? Because I think many of our journeys and what we think we should be doing, how we want to do it, is to try and maintain control, right? To create something that we want and make life fit us rather than making ourselves fit life, or fit with life rather, right? When we try to make life fit us, we feel disillusioned because it won't. It's like trying to control the weather, right? Trying to control the tides of the ocean. You can't. You know, it's a force that's much bigger than you and you have no power or control over it. The only thing you can do is align with it in whatever way works for you in that moment, right? Getting an umbrella if it's raining outside so that you can still go outside and do what you need to do, right? Pivoting, finding realignment, all that stuff. And by forcing ourselves to try and change things or feel like things aren't right or I'm wrong or life is wrong because it's not working the exact way we want it to work, feels kind of bad. It feels really bad to exist in that framework. And so my journey, and I'm sure many other people's journeys, is to just accept things as they are and to allow things to happen as they need to. The weather will happen as it needs to. You have no control over it. And that's okay. Part of the beauty of life too is that things change and are in constant flux. You know, we can't enjoy a sunny day without experiencing rainy days or snowy days or whatever, right? And rainy days, snowy days, all that stuff needs to happen. It needs to happen, and we have no say or control over it. And that's that. Like, that's that. You have to just kind of accept that. And I know that sounds so frustrating, especially for anybody who has like pathological demand avoidance or any kind of demand avoidance, right? It doesn't have to be pathological necessarily, but anybody who feels like anxious or scared when they are demanded to accept something, or they feel frustrated, that's part of this process, is allowing yourself to just be okay with it and realizing like, yeah, I would like something different to happen. It would be ideal if something different happened, and also it's not happening. And that's that. Like, there's no other alternative. I can't do anything to control it. And this applies to relationships with people as well. People will show up as they show up, as they need to show up for themselves. It has nothing to do with you. You know, it really doesn't. Ultimately, nothing anybody says or does or whatever has anything to do with you. They're showing up the way they need to show up for them, whether it's to maintain their own sense of control, security, safety, for their own, you know, inner wounds, all that stuff. And the only thing you can do is just accept them. And that doesn't mean you have to then accept them and allow them into your life and, you know, force yourself to be with them. No, you just accept them for what they are and then decide, okay, how am I going to navigate this? Am I going to still be as engaged as I was before? Am I going to let them go? Am I going to sometimes see them, sometimes not? You know, like, that's the power you have to work with the cards you've been dealt. And, you know, I think sometimes we might feel like we are failures by just accepting reality. You know, how, like, I can't control it, I can't change it, like, then I must not be good enough, I can't handle things the way other people can handle them. Like, what is my life if I can't control it? But I think it's actually really strong to accept things, to accept the cards you've been dealt and work with those. That's actually a really strong thing, because it's so scary to accept things, right? Because it's so terrifying to just accept reality and navigate it in whatever way you can. That's actually really strong. And I think forcing things or trying to force things into place is just more of a sign of fear, right? And fear is not the best way to navigate your life, unfortunately, even though of course things are scary and you will be scared. Of course you will. There's no shame in being scared, but it's just a lesson I've had to learn the hard way. Like, fear is going to be there. Uncertainty is going to be there. A lack of control is going to be there. And so rather than, you know, trying to push against it or reject it, just accept it, right? The moment you accept it, the easier things feel, honestly. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but they do. They feel lighter because you've just realized, like, this is it. Okay, this is this. And again, there's disillusionment there because maybe you were sold a certain vision of life and how it was going to be and how it's supposed to be. And I'm sure many millennials like myself have also experienced this disillusionment with the fact that we were sold a different kind of lifestyle than the one that we are seeing happen societally right now. But yeah, acceptance is the only way to go. So yeah, I hope this episode was interesting, insightful, informative. I know it was kind of like all over the place, rambling a little bit, but these are just a few of the things that have been on my mind lately. And I'm also getting back into the flow of podcasting again after a week, which is so bizarre. But after being really consistent with it and then taking a week off, you kind of feel like, oh, this is, you know, feeling like a kid riding a bike for the first time again. But yeah, I hope this was interesting, informative, and I'll be back again next week with another episode.